This morning, Tim Davie made his first appearance since his resignation, trying to spur on BBC journalists unsettled by his sudden departure.
The BBC's going to be thriving, and I support every one of the team. I'm very proud of them. Thank you very much, Your Honour.
Once inside, he skipped the queue of thousands of BBC journalists and chose a manager to interview him.
My name is Deborah Copeland and I lead internal communications here. How are you feeling since you made the decision to step down?
It's been a tough few days, hasn't it? And very tough.
The BBC chairman sat beside him. His message, he might be tough to replace.
Oh my God, it is fantastic. To be able to find a replacement for Tim is going to be difficult. It's my big job now, and he set a very high standard.
The outgoing Director General insisted the BBC was better than some of its newspaper critics.
It just does good work, and that speaks. It speaks louder than any newspaper, any weaponisation. We are the very best of what I think we should be as a society, and that will never change.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
And for BBC employees nervously watching the staff address, a few hours later, encouraging words from the government.
At a time when the lines are being dangerously blurred between fact and opinion, news and polemic, the BBC stands apart. It is a light on the hill for people here and across the world.
Does he want to snuff out the light? President Trump has told the BBC he could sue them for $1 billion if he's not happy with what they offer him by Friday. Donald Trump, as president, has sued or is suing a range of media outfits. BBC insiders say the corporation will already be discussing what language and how much money will stop him suing the BBC.
Perhaps through their own US lawyers. They may have lawyers in Florida, certainly they have lawyers in Washington and New York. I would expect the BBC to be talking to Mr. Trump's lawyer in Florida, to be discussing the wording of an apology, the details of a retraction, whether something has to be broadcast in the slot that Panorama went out, all that sort of thing. And above all, trying to work out what level of compensation would satisfy the president.
Late last night, Donald Trump's lawyer spoke exclusively to the sort of broadcaster he prefers.
Potentially could bring the corporation down. It was, of course, once known and respected worldwide as a renowned media source, a trusted source of truth. Some may argue that's changed over recent years. Would the president have any issue with potentially bringing down the BBC in that manner?
I can't speak for the president as to what his feelings would be with regard to that, but I can note two things. Number one, decisions have consequences, and the act of the BBC was an intentional one, and there are consequences to that.
Has he mentioned GB News at all?
He has, and I know he's fond of GB News, and I think he appreciates the treatment that he receives on GB News.
Lisa Nandy said removing the BBC board member, former Conservative aide Robbie Gibb, who's been accused of driving the criticism of BBC editorial mistakes, would not be legal. And she ducked this Labour MP's question.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Robbie Gibb, faithful or traitor?
Perhaps the honourable lady and I can hear her views about that over a few drinks later on.
Lisa Nandy said the long-planned process of deciding the BBC's future would start within weeks.
Well, we are joined now from Westminster by the former BBC News political editor Andrew Marr, who now has a show on LBC, and from the US by CNN's chief media analyst Brian Stelter. As the BBC World Service motto has it, let nation speak unto nation. That's what we're doing tonight. Let me start with you, Andrew. Lisa Nandy said tonight the BBC is a shining light on the hill. Do you think that light will go out, or is her reassurance enough to keep it flickering?
I think it's the gusts around the light, if I can put it that way, are very, very wild at the moment. This is a really, really dangerous moment, I think, for the BBC. I've just been talking to Katie McFarlane, who was Deputy National Security Advisor to Donald Trump, very close to him. And she thought he was deadly serious about this case. He was going to prosecute it, probably in California, in Florida. He wouldn't necessarily be going for the full $1 billion take, but this is very... Even the legal fees here, Matt, are going to be enormous. And I think the pressure on the BBC is going to be intense. I think Trump is deadly serious about going for them. And the problem is, of course, as we both know, right at the moment, there is no real leadership to deal with this.
Indeed. Brian, I mean, you've written about the so-called Trump squeeze. The BBC is in the middle of this Trump squeeze, so just remind us how that works.
It's a moment right now for the BBC to make the same kind of decision that other media companies have had to make this year. Do you fight or do you fold? And this isn't just about media companies. We've seen this at Harvard and other US universities. We've seen this with law firms and other institutions. The ones who fight end up winning. The ones who fight end up usually prevailing. The ones who appear to fold to Trump, like Paramount, the parent company of CBS News, settling with Trump over the summer, they endure a reputational harm. And in the case of Disney, suspending Jimmy Kimmel in September, they end up having a big consumer backlash, so people canceling subscriptions. So I think one of the factors the BBC board has to think about right now is what the backlash will be if they appear to capitulate to the US president, because it will be severe.
Right. And just on Florida media law, which I don't know much about, but you know more. I mean, I've heard it said that actually if the BBC were to take this, to have it stay in court in Florida, it stands quite a good chance of winning.
That is true. Media lawyers believe it would be a strong case for the BBC and a weak case for the president. You'd never know what kind of jury you're going to get, however, and that's true in any state, but particularly in Florida, where depending on what part of the state, you're going to get a very Trump-friendly jury. But most of Trump's cases do not go to trial, and I think it's important to note that most of these letters don't turn into lawsuits. Most of the lawsuits don't prevail for Trump. The New York Times right now is fighting a Trump lawsuit. The Wall Street Journal is fighting a Trump lawsuit. And I would argue that within the media world, those brands have benefited by deciding to fight.
Right. Andrew, if the BBC decides to fold, right, rather than fight, its reputation is shot to pieces, isn't it, around the world?
It'll be terrible because around the world people will be watching this. Don't forget the BBC is also under attack from Moscow, where the Russian Foreign Ministry has really gone for it over the coverage of Ukraine. The Israeli government and Tel Aviv have gone for the BBC as well. This is a big international story, and to the extent that the BBC is part of how Britain is seen around the world, it affects all of us. It affects Britain's reputation in the world as well. I asked Donald Trump's advisor earlier on whether her advice would be, if the BBC did make a grovelling apology, all of that stuff, would that be enough? And she said, absolutely not. This is something that the president feels really strongly about. So I think trying to fold, trying to apologise may well not be enough.
OK.
And
go on.
The argument the BBC has been making is, yes, this was a terrible thing to do, this editing was egregious and the rest of it. But in the end, he was whipping up the crowd, he was very belligerent, and the congressional inquiry also found that he had misbehaved on that day. And therefore, the case they were making, the broader case they were making in that programme was fair. I think that would be that would have to be their main line of defence. But it'd be intensely political and very, very polarising.
Indeed. Brian, you were trying to come in there.
I'm just making the point that why this matters to Trump so much, right? Anytime he can be perceived to be beating a media outlet, he wants to do that because he wants dominance. He ultimately wants control over the news, although it's important news outlets make sure he doesn't get it. And why does this matter to Trump? Because it's about his innocence. He wants to portray himself as an innocent on January 6th and not as the instigator of a riot. So here we are, almost 6 years later, and it's still about January 6th.
Andrew, we're in the middle of we're about to start a very lively debate about the future of the license fee, charter renewal. Lisa Nandy referred to it again tonight. There are 300,000 people, apparently, who have refused to pay their license fee. Boris Johnson now apparently being one of them, the former Prime Minister. If the BBC ends up paying Donald Trump 10 million quid, 60 million quid, whatever it is, surely that will make their case for the license fee even more difficult, won't it?
Very, very dangerous indeed. I think we've seen lots of BBC scandals in the past, of course, but I think this is different for one very important political reason. We are now in a much more sort of tremulous political atmosphere. We have lots of different parties competing, and there is a strong chance that Reform and Nigel Farage will form the next government. Now, Nigel Farage yesterday, and I think again today, was talking about the number of people who would cease to pay their licence fee, given what the accusations against the BBC, particularly over bias over Gaza and the rest of it. And I think it's very unlikely that a future Reform government would keep with the charter, keep with the licence fee. I think we would see the end of the BBC. I think this is an incredibly dangerous moment for the corporation.
Before I go to you, Brian, just a quick one, Andrew, on Robbie Gibb, who you used to work for, because he was head of political programmes at the BBC. He has been accused of fomenting a coup inside the BBC. Do you buy that?
No, I don't. Because I don't understand how he would do it, who his allies would be, how it would actually operate. The truth of the matter is the BBC board did not want Tim Davie to go. They begged him, more or less, and the chairman begged him not to go, and it was Tim Davie's determination to go, which is why he went. So I don't see how a coup would work. Robbie Gibb has certainly got strong political views, but, you know, he is not the absolutely, he'll forgive me for saying so, absolutely brilliant Machiavellian mastermind that some people are painting him as.
He'll never forgive you for that. Brian, finally to you. I mean, there's a much bigger question here, really, which is kind of what is right and what is wrong? What is truth and what is false? This is a country, your country, that cannot agree whether January the 6th was an insurrection or not, that cannot agree whether the election 2020 was won by Joe Biden or not. I mean, that's the really big question here, isn't it? And it's really dangerous.
Yes, the parallels here between the U.S. and U.K. are very clear. Trump has defunded Voice of America, right? He has defunded PBS and NPR. He's torn down public media in the U.S. There are some in the U.K. that want to do the same there. What we also see are parallels in this war over truth. Trump gave an interview to Fox News yesterday, said lots of things that are untrue, and yet he wants to hold the BBC to the highest possible standard. And he should. News outlets should be held to the highest standards, but we are in an environment where we are covering politicians who are given the lowest benefit, the lowest standards, the lowest opportunities. It's an incredibly unfair kind of dynamic, even though that's the reality of what we're living in. Ultimately, I think this is about trying to tear down institutions of all sorts. It happens to be the BBC's turn, but it's happening against every major media company in the UK and in the US.
And what happens in Washington doesn't stay there necessarily, as they say.